Good evening. I'm Carol Burr with the League of Women Voters, and tonight we're going to be hearing from U.S. Congress District 1 candidates. The League is a nonpartisan political organization that cares deeply about empowering voters. Candidate forums such as these are important tools to help you be an informed voter. We also encourage you to visit votersedge.org to receive in-depth information about the candidates and the issues on your ballot. We believe it's an honor to serve in a public office, and we commend each of the candidates for running for office and also for agreeing to meet with us in this virtual forum. The forum is being broadcast on two formats, Zoom webinar and YouTube video. The links are posted on the LWVBcounty.org and our Facebook page, and will be available for viewing within the next couple of days. We also thank our national public radio affiliate, NSPR, for their live broadcast of this event. These videos are the property of the League of Women Voters and may not be used without express permission of the League. Any showing of the video must be the whole video without editing. The League is not responsible for the content of any recording that is not arranged for and agreed to by the League. So tonight's format will give the candidates 2 minutes opening statement, a 2-minute response time for questions, and 2-minute closing. Questions have been collected from the public, media, and League members, and a coin toss established who will give his opening first. So the first to open will be the last to close. So, Mr. LaMalfa, your opening statement, please.
All right. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
You read me well? All right, thanks so much for organizing and having this tonight. One of these days we won't be doing so many things by Zoom, or maybe we'll be back to doing more in person, but you know, we accommodate how we need to. So thank you, and let's take it away here. So where are we at? Americans are frustrated these days because of how things are going. And this, a little over 2 years ago, things did not look like this. We had a very strong economy. The prices of things were much lower than what we're seeing today. We had energy security. We were making more energy than ever. We were actually an exporter of energy, and we had more potential to do that. We had plenty of food on the shelves that the United States always had. And now we see that skyrocketing food prices and even empty shelves sometimes in our stores, which is unimaginable in the United States. And so the frustration for the regular people out there is very great. It's very impactful and harmful to especially middle income, lower income families. As well, here in Northern California, our economy is suffering from the policies that in large part government is causing or not doing anything about, such as our forestry issues. Last year, the Dixie Fire, 1 million acres, Car Fire before that, and the Camp Fire, and so many more. You can't even hardly keep up with them. Millions of acres have burned. And it's so detrimental during the time of the fire that the environmental angle of that somehow we're saving the forest by doing nothing to them, by not treating them, by not harvesting, by not doing the right thing that helps manage over time, is actually much more harmful to the species, the forest, air quality, and the local economy. Why in the world is America the #2 importer of wood when we have it all in the backyard? We can put it to work for us. So we have the ideas, and we're looking forward, if things go right in this election, to a Republican House of Representatives that can advance these ideas and have a much more centric focus on the American people's needs, not the needs of government, the expansion of government, and all these failed policies that are hurting us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LaMalfa. Mr. Steiner.
Thank you, ma'am. Good evening, all. My name is Max Steiner. I'm a moderate Democrat, a combat veteran, and a 5th-generation Northern Californian. I believe in America, and I know that we can do better. First, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this event. Second, I would like to thank my opponent, Doug LaMalfa, for finally deciding to participate in this online Zoom. But I want the record to show that he refused to participate in the primary election Zoom forum and has refused every offer from my campaign for a live debate. I am running for Congress because the North State deserves strong, effective, and honest representation in Washington. Locally, we need to embrace sustainable forest management, re-examine harmful regulations, and build dams to mitigate climate change. I can build bridges with moderates on both sides of the aisle to get this done. My opponent has done nothing for the North State in his 10 years in office. Nationally, we need to reinforce the fundamentals of our democracy. We need to ensure that the chaos of 2020 does not and cannot happen again. My opponent spread the big lie after the 2020 election, falsely claiming that Trump won the election and then voting against certification after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. What happens internationally also affects us here at home. Russia invaded Ukraine. China looks hungrily at Taiwan. The world is a dangerous place, yet we have the fewest number of veterans serving in Congress since the end of World War II. I have been in the Army for 17 years, and I served this country for 7 years as a diplomat. I understand war and peace in ways my opponent cannot even begin to comprehend. This election is not a choice between a Democrat and a Republican. This election is a choice between reality and fantasy. I recognize that climate change is real, that election results are legitimate, and that reproductive privacy saves women's lives. My opponent denies all of these truths. The North State has real problems that require real solutions. Doug LaMalfa fights only for his own interests. I kick down doors as an infantryman in Iraq for this country, and I would be honored to fight for every one of you in Washington.
Thank you. I would like to remind both of you that we have rules of civility, so I hope we will keep the conversation focused on what you'd like to do if you are elected.
Let's do
So
this.
the first question, and Mr. Steiner, you will be the first to answer. What policies would you propose for managing dwindling water supplies in California?
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer there, federally, we need to build more dams. I share my opponent's love of the Sites Reservoir. I will say that project has taken far too long, and it will require someone to go to DC and work with a Democratic administration and work with Democrats in Sacramento to get that project forward. Because it's a joint project, right? It's 75% state and 25% federal. And to get something like Sites built, which would add 1.5 million acre-feet of water storage to the North State water system, that's important. It takes federal and state money, and it takes federal and state buy-in. And that means that you need someone that can, work across the aisle, whether you're Democrat or Republican. Garamendi's done a great job on Sites. We just got $30 million for Sites out of the Inflation Reduction Act. That's something that my opponent voted against. And so there's Sites, right? The second one is raising Shasta, right? That's the other big water capacity increase in the North State that we need to look at. Listen, every dam has environmental costs, but climate change is real. And we need to be able to store more water for droughts, and we need to be able to have more water capacity to spare for floods. With climate change, we're going to have more rain events and fewer snow events. And that means we're facing this, what seems ironic, but we have a greater risk of flooding and a greater risk of droughts at the same time. And that means you need more water storage. Those are the two big dams. There are a lot of smaller reservoir capacity that you could add. But yeah, the fundamental federal response to drought in the North State, to climate change in the North State, is increasing capacity. And that means building more dams.
Thank you. Mr. LaMalfa?
Phrase the question again, please.
Yes. What policies would you propose for managing dwindling water supplies in California?
Managing dwindling. Well, it is enhanced by our longtime efforts to add to our water supply. The Shasta Dam raise would increase approximately 630,000 more acre feet if we could get that 18.5-foot raise, as well as Sites Reservoir, which has been, my dad was working on that years ago in his capacity with Northern California Water. And we've been able to get the ball moving just a little bit under the Trump administration, about $50 million forward to help some of the interim infrastructure there. Then the recent, at least one good piece of the infrastructure bill lately has been the new $30 million that we've been able to get pulled in there. But the voters in California many years ago voted for additional water storage, and it's been the slow wheels of government and obstruction, maybe coming from government, and a lot of times it's environmental groups that have held up Sites Reservoir from happening. So we got to keep the pressure on doing that. So I'm proud of the work we've been able to do to keep that pressure up, working with Mr. Garamendi. So we had a bipartisan effort on that. So the district has changed. Now it's all entirely within the district I hope to represent once again. And so we'll keep the foot on the pedal because it's very, very important. We add to our water supply, but also the management side. Now, the people in charge, whether it's State Water Resources Control Board or Bureau of Reclamation, have let so much water out of our dams. We actually have more water in Lake Shasta this year and Lake Oroville this year than last year. Yet the cuts to agriculture, to people, all of our districts, we've seen it in Klamath, we've seen it in Western Siskiyou, we've seen it in ACI district in Shasta, as well as all the districts down the Sacramento stem have been devastated by government mismanagement, letting too much water out the Delta when they had the opportunity to store more. We've forgotten, I guess, that last October we had a huge amount of rain and near record snowpack in December. But how do we have less like this? It's really dithering by government in an aggressive single species management for endangered species and that water being released. We don't have that luxury anymore.
Thank you. Okay, the next question, Mr. LaMalfa, you'll be the first to answer. What do you think is causing the current inflation, and what should the federal government do to bolster family finances and lower prices?
You have to lay it right at the hands of the government spending way too much. When you inject borrowed money into the economy by the trillions, that's been happening. You know, in the first COVID response, we supported that. You know, about $3 trillion, which we can't get used to this word trillion and have it roll off the tongue so easily, because our national debt sits at 31 trillion. That's a legacy that will be passed to the next generations. And I'm really fearful about what's going on with interest rates going up. And that if interest rates go too much up on the servicing of that debt, it will devour the part of the budget we have discretion over at this point. So inflation has been caused by too much government spending and too many checks going out to people and causing too many dollars chasing too few products. That was in the middle of COVID when government was forcing people to not be able to go to work other than who they deemed essential. And so now we're feeling that effect. Our supply chain is still almost completely broken. We're having trouble getting our agricultural products onto ships and shipping it out of California. The stuff that comes from China, they unload it as fast as they can and send the ships back to China empty instead of coming to the port of Oakland, for example, and picking up our ag products under the agreement we have with China. So it's government spending that is a big portion of this and not focus. You know, we talk about infrastructure bills. Why does it have to be a 1.9 trillion when we're only getting about 9% of it to actual infrastructure? I would support infrastructure all day long, and I want to, but when we have such massive bills and massive spending that under the Democrat plan, we're going to have much more focused ones as Republican in the majority.
Thank you. Mr. Steiner?
Yeah, I would like to point out that inflation is a worldwide problem, and it is not confined to the United States. And therefore, to lay the blame solely on the current inhabitant of the White House is nonsensical. So, you know, what we have right now are two things. Broadly, we have a supply chain disruption that is only now working itself through the economy. So that happened during COVID, and we're still feeling the after effects. And we also have corporations, you know, using their monopoly power to extract record profits. So this is something that we need to understand. When you see those high prices at the pump, you are paying for record profits to ExxonMobil, to Shell. You know, it requires a government that can look at the totality of the system to say, yes, this is a worldwide problem. Yes, it is probably temporary. Yes, we have to do something about it to ameliorate the pain that Americans are feeling at the pump, at the checkout aisle. But fundamentally, we need to understand that we can't just be casting blame around and looking for a fall guy and picking the White House because it's a big White House and we typically blame it when anything goes wrong. So this is a worldwide problem. And to say like this is the Democrats it's silly. It doesn't make any sense. So, you know, I have an econ degree from Berkeley, and I can say like, yes, I can look outside and read papers that aren't published, you know, in California, and say like, yes, this is a problem that's affecting London, it's affecting Germany. They didn't do stimulus programs nearly as big as the US. They're having inflation higher than the US. This is a supply chain problem, and it will pass. But until it does, we need to come together, and we need to make sure that corporations aren't extracting monopoly rents from hardworking American consumers.
Thank you. The next question, Mr. Steiner, you'll be the first to answer. Do you think our election process has integrity? And if not, what would you change to keep our elections free and fair?
Our elections are fundamentally free and fair, and all politicians of all parties need to respect the results of elections no matter what they are. Listen, in every election, half of the people running lose. Okay, that's just a fact. And we can't survive a democracy where people refuse to admit that they lost. It's okay to be a poor sport on, you know, like the tennis courts or, you know, on the basketball courts, but it's crazy to be a poor sport in democracy. I've seen democracies collapse, right? I was in Iraq when their democracy collapsed. Ballots were just round one, and then everyone went into the streets and started using bullets. And it's really important that voters understand that their vote matters, that they participate in the process, that they do their research. But it's also important that political elites, that politicians say, I've lost, admit when they did not get the most votes, admit when they did not get the most electoral college votes. And we've really seen that kind of consensus collapse at the national level, right? So, we have, it's a record number. It's like over 100 politicians running throughout the United States that don't agree with the results of the 2020 election. I would love my opponent to confirm right now that he agrees that 2020 was a legitimate election and that he was wrong to vote against decertifying the election. But I'm not sure if I'll hear that in the next 2 minutes. And that makes me very worried. So, I want to reemphasize to everyone listening here tonight, right? Elections have consequences and elections must be respected. Our system is free and fair. It is the envy of most democracies in the world. And I want you to cast your ballot between now and November 8th for the candidate that you most want to represent you in DC.
Thank you. Mr. LaMalfa?
The people of the United States deserve to have great confidence in their elections. That should be a universal thought. Doesn't matter your party, your color, whatever. So what is the issue then when people ask questions about how elections have gone? I think it's part of the charge of Congress, no matter what year it is. And there's been a history of that. In 2004, there's been even in 2016. So I guess the example in 2016 of Hillary Clinton questioning that election for 4 years of Trump, or Stacey Abrams in 2018 believing that she had won governorship for all that time. This isn't simply a 2020 issue. So let's get back to the basics. We need to have elections that have integrity by not changing the rules without a legislative action, such as happened in several states. You have to legislate how you do election law, not just a stroke of a pen by an executive. So we have an issue where people don't have trust in the amount of ballots that are going out by the mail. An election needs to end on election night at 8 p.m. You count the ballots and you get the result within a very short amount of time, just like it worked for many years. We have much more electronic technology to make it easier and better, yet elections are seeming to get worse, especially in the urban areas when trying to get the final result, because they keep tweaking and playing games with that. So it's really a matter of the voters need to have confidence in a clear set of rules that are consistent. The election should end on election day. You should have voter ID so we know who's voting, and that the mail-in ballots are, the voting rolls are cleaned up, so we don't have people that have moved out of state, that, everybody knows someone has received multiple ballots at their house, or somebody doesn't live there anymore, or someone that was deceased. That doesn't increase confidence in that. And some of the actions taken in elections offices around the country in 2020 do not increase that confidence.
Thank you. Next question, Mr. LaMalfa, you'll be the first to answer. What role, if any, do you think the government should have in reproductive choice?
That's an individual choice of people in their own lives. The government shouldn't be mandating, as if they're trying to do here in California right now. They're trying to bring abortion tourism into the state. So parents need to have a say in what is happening with their child, not have their children whisked off for healthcare that they don't know about under the guise of healthcare. So the government's role really needs to be about protecting the unborn and educating people what that really means. There's so much available out there to educate that is a life. And so I've always strongly been pro-life and pro-facts on this thing as well. These aren't just blobs of cells. Each pregnancy means a human being. And when people have all the information, I think they're going to do the right thing.
Thank you. Mr. Steiner?
Yeah, so I don't know if my opponent caught himself saying that this is an individual choice, and he's absolutely right, and that's nothing that resembles his policy on this issue. My opponent has said previously that this is a states' right issue. He didn't bring that up tonight. I guess that's passed. That's good, because at the same time, my opponent is the co-sponsor of a law that would define murder as starting as a fertilized egg. That means that if you took the Plan B day after pill, you would be committing murder. And that's crazy, right? We as Americans need to understand that this is an individual privacy right. Okay, any restriction on abortion will jeopardize women's lives. And it's un-American, right? I'm a Catholic, all right? I probably am a lot closer personally to Doug LaMalfa than to many of the people listening on this call. But I'm not willing to, impose my religious beliefs onto other people. I also think the timer is broken, by the way. So Tim, you might want to check that out. Anyway, so we as a government need to work through this issue, and we had Roe v. Wade, and Roe v. Wade is a good law. Roe v. Wade said, hey, in the first trimester, there are going to be almost no restrictions. In the second trimester, there are going to be more restrictions. And in the third trimester, after viability, there will be a lot of restrictions. And that's a good compromise, okay? Because we're Americans and our government needs to reflect compromise. It needs to reflect individual liberty. And it can't be a reflection of what we think is biblical truth, okay? This is a fundamental issue for many voters this election. And I want to make this very clear. I will fight for Roe v. Wade in Washington. And if you send me to Washington, I will fight to protect your rights that the Republican Supreme Court has taken away.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Steiner, you'll be the first one to answer this question. What do you think the federal government should be doing to address global warming?
Yeah, the first step comes in admitting that climate change is real, that it is man-made, that our pollution is having impacts worldwide, and in adopting policies that ultimately reduce our environmental footprint, right, our carbon footprint. I do think that trying to wean ourselves off of energy too quickly is a mistake, okay? Energy security is national security. We have seen over the last 6 months just how important oil is to the international economy. I think the decision to shut down Keystone XL was a mistake by Biden. Okay, we need to produce oil for the world because the world is full of bad states with oil like Russia, like Iran, like Venezuela, that if we cut our oil production, they'll be the only suppliers for our allies in Europe, in the Western Pacific. And that's bad, all right? We need to think about a lot of things, not just the climate. We need to think about the survival of Western democracy. We need to think about the survival of Ukraine as a nation state. So I want to make it very clear, we can have a long-term objective, but at the same time, we can't shoot ourselves in the foot in the short term just to show how serious we are. Fundamentally, the biggest thing that we can do to control greenhouse gas emissions worldwide is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in China. They have overtaken us as the largest producer. They are a strategic threat, both militarily and now environmentally. We need to make sure that goods that we buy from China are not being subsidized by an enormous carbon footprint, that producers can relocate to the United States and produce green products without being undercut by dirty products from China. So I would support a very strong trade policy that punishes global carbon emissions, and I would support subsidies and incentives that gradually bring Americans into lower our carbon footprint in the long term.
Thank you. Mr. LaMalfa.
Repeat the question, please.
Oh, yes. What do you think the federal government should be doing to address global warming?
Well, in the guise of climate change, the climate is always changing. It's a fallacy to believe that humankind is going to control climate. Carbon is an important building block of our entire life forms on this earth. And so to deny that carbon is important and has a role seems to be what those at the far reaches of this climate drive. It's almost like a religion to them because it's about all they talk about in Washington, D.C. So what can we do? The United States produces things cleaner and more responsibly than anywhere else in the world. So why in the world are we importing so much from China and other Pacific Rim areas that are not doing things like we are? They're building another new coal power plant in China, about one a week, it seems. And so here we are suffering in this country from an economy that's crippled by trying to electrify everything when we don't even have the electrical grid for it, for example. So I'd also like to point out that carbon dioxide is only 0.04% of our atmosphere. It's a minute amount. And if it drops below 0.02, plant life really starts to suffer. We need plants, obviously. So it's a situation where we're hamstringing our own economy, our own ability to do things better in this country by ever increasing regulations and shipping those jobs, shipping that industry to China and India and other places. They're not nearly as close as we're the only country that's really had any success in reducing carbon. yet we're taking away the abilities to do that, getting rid of hydroelectric dams like on the Klamath, and letting the water out of the lakes so we can't generate hydro like it happened in Orville last year. And miraculously, they saved the nuclear power plant for 5 years anyway, down San Luis Obispo, which had been slated to close down. That's CO2 free if you love CO2 free things. Then on the other hand, our forestry, what a disaster that's been. The Forest Service needs to get cracking and manage aggressively, just 10 times more land per year so that we don't have so much coming from our forests to be millions of acres of fires. So we can take these steps, and even when the temperature is warming, we need to be storing more water. We need to be cutting more trees and managing forests better and mitigating that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. LaMalfa, are you able to see the stop sign?
No, I'm not seeing one on my screen here.
Ah, okay. Well, apologies. I occasionally cut you off because I thought you could see the stop sign. At any rate, apologies.
I'll try and speak here a little bit.
You're doing fine. Okay, the next question. What do you think the federal government should be doing about gun violence? Mr. LaMalfa, we'll start with you.
What is gun violence? It's people violence. Guns are an inanimate object. And so we're basically want to take the tools away of people to be able to defend themselves when at the same time they're defunding the police and they're letting more and more criminals out of prison, releasing, and they're having no bail situations where people can walk freely after they've been arrested for a crime. I mean, it's all stacked up against the law-abiding citizen. So you want to take the tools away too? What isn't happening is the enforcement of criminals that do get found with guns that aren't supposed to own then, probably less than 10% when someone is trying to illegally buy a gun through the check system in this country and in this state. 90% don't get followed up by the Department of Justice. They have the laws on the books, but they're not doing anything about it. Then we've had situations where they've gotten rid of enhancements for people using a gun in a crime. Why do they get rid of the enhancements? We're letting people out of prison easier and easier and making more and more of a burden on people trying to defend themselves in all around the state, all around the country, especially in rural areas where you live a much further distance from response time from law enforcement. So between defunding the police, making that much harder, it's going in the wrong direction. The Second Amendment is very, very important for people to be able to have the basic tools to defend themselves if they so choose. Not everybody has to own a gun if they don't want to. We need to do things to harden our schools, and that might be part of that as well, because of the horrific things that happen there. You know, criminals don't obey laws. They're going to get guns. They're going to make guns. They're going to import them. They're going to come across our porous border from Mexico or other ways. So I'm always been had a very high rating with the NRA and the California Rifle and Pistol Association. I noticed my opponent has either F or D ratings with that, even though he'll try and pass himself off as pro-gun. That doesn't really hold up when you talk with the people that monitor this and rate how the elected officials are really going to act when it comes to Second Amendment rights. So I'm proud of that record, and I'll always stick to that.
Thank you. Mr. Steiner?
Yeah, so first, I'd like to address those ratings. It's really weird. You know, like I answered the NRA questionnaire. I answered 21 of 24. I agree with the NRA. And yet they gave me an F. And that's because the NRA is a bunch of partisan hacks. So the NRA is a faction of the Republican Party. And in many ways, the CRPA is too. Even though I'm a member of the CRPA in Shasta, and even though they gave me the highest ranking of any Democrat in the state, I still got a D. But you know, Doug, it matters a lot more when a Democrat gets a D than when every Republican gets an A. I do agree with you that this is fundamentally a question of access to rifles, access to weapons, right? We shouldn't be banning weapon types just because we're scared of them, just because we see them on TV. I think that's lunacy, right? We have a number, 4 million people own AR-15s, right? And only a handful are used in crimes. We can't take away the constitutional rights of everyone just because they do something that scares us, okay? Like, yes, you are looking at a Democrat who likes guns. Unsurprisingly, a guy in the Army likes guns. But this is a question. There is a difference between us. And that is that we need robust background checks. We need robust red flag laws. We need to have a culture where police will go and take away a weapon from someone and put a mental health hold on them for 2 or 3 weeks if they say something on Facebook saying, I'm going to go shoot up a school. We can't rely on a good guy with a gun. We saw that fail in Uvalde. We can't rely on hardening schools. We saw that fail in Uvalde. There are a number of common sense reforms that are widely supported, even among gun owners. They would reduce the likelihood that someone who wants to commit a crime, someone who is not mature enough to handle a semi-automatic weapon, to keep them from acquiring a weapon that can kill a lot of people. But yes, we have a Second Amendment. The Second Amendment guarantees your right to keep and bear arms, and I support the Second Amendment. And it was incredibly disappointing to see the NRA reflect the partisan nature of today in giving me an F without even apparently reading my response to that.
Thank you. All right, Ms. LaMalfa, let's see, actually, Mr. Steiner, you'll answer first on this next question. What do you see as practical ways to address growing numbers of people seeking asylum in the United States?
Yeah, the question there, so you're nailing the issue of immigration of our time is asylum. So I worked on this in Honduras. I saw the first wave of asylum seekers hit the United States in 2014. And basically in 2012, we had a change in law that expanded the definition of asylum from people that were being oppressed by their state for being a mention of a specific ethnic group, think the Holocaust in Europe in the 1930s. And we expanded that to domestic violence and gang violence. So, that exploded the number of people that were eligible for asylum. And there are a lot of people coming to the United States because they are fundamentally economic immigrants. And I want to make this very clear that they are good people, all right? Like they are people that care about their families, that want to do what's best for them and their kids, but they're undermining US labor, all right? And they're undermining our asylum system. Our asylum system was designed to help people like the Jews in 1930, to help the Armenians in 1910. We have a broken system now. We have almost 1.5 million people claiming asylum this year. I've worked a lot in immigration. If you want to send someone to Washington to fix immigration, send me. What we did in 2014 was to start immediately deporting people that presented asylum claims and repatriating them to Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador, the Northern Triangle. But fundamentally, the answer of immigration needs to be one of reforming our immigration system and punishing employers of illegal immigrants, right? And that is something that my opponent does not want to do. My opponent is the co-sponsor of the Farm Worker Modernization Act, which would give amnesty to people who are in the United States, but work on a farm for 8 years, which is awfully convenient because my opponent owns a farm. So he's designing a class of people to work for him as indentured servitude in exchange for being allowed to stay in the United States. And I find that to be un-American. All right, our immigration problem needs to be solved with robust enforcement, with a strong border, and by punishing Americans who employ illegal immigrants here at home. And it will not be solved with amnesty.
Thank you. Mr. LaMalfa?
The porous border we have does not help anybody. It hurts the people in this country, hurts our economy, the overwhelming impact it has on schools, healthcare, law enforcement, jails, the whole works. So the asylum laws need to be redefined as to what the original intent was, because the numbers massing on our border is overwhelming. All they have to do is present themselves and say the magic words and they come across. I visited Yuma, Arizona last spring, and what you see happening there is just unspeakable. And so we're sending a signal to the people that would think that they can come to this country, and they're thanking Mr. Biden for that, is that come on up, you can be part of our benefit package, you can get jobs here. Many of them are economic seekers of entry into this country. That's not what asylum is at all. And so it's not being screened properly. So we need to continue and resume the process of what President Trump had in building the border barrier. And we need to quit sending a false signal to the people down, whether it's Central America or what have you, that come on up because you're going to get in. They send vans to pick people up at the border and quickly get them processed and turn them loose in the country. And they're supposed to come back within 2 years for a court date. That's not working. It's overwhelming our system in this country. And so the asylum rules need to be revised. They need to be set back to something much more reflective of those that truly, truly need it. And the enforcement starts at the fence. The enforcement starts with not giving the signal to people, hey, come on. We're the horrific things that are happening to them as they make that long trek up here, to the women, especially to kids being used as a pawn in that are being, they're brought in basically as the cover and then taken and shipped back by these cartels. How in the world we want to have a partnership with cartels? That's what's happening with the Democrats' plans and execution on asylum and on our border.
Thank you. All right, Mr. LaMalfa, you'll be the first to answer this question. If elected, what issue would be your top priority, and how will you go about getting the House to address the issue?
Well, I'll look at that two different ways. Locally, here in Northern California in our state, we have to address water. We have to address forestry. We have to address our local rural economy. And those are things that are also important to everybody across the country, because when California doesn't grow the food that it should be growing, we have many crops in the United States, 90% of them come from California. They're gonna have to get them from some other country as well. Energy. So you can't just pick one, really. Energy is really the driver of everything in the economy, and the freedom that we have and the ability to move freely about the country, do our jobs, take our kids to school, go on vacation. So the broken energy policy we have of of denying that fossil fuel is part of it, that oil, natural gas, they need to be an important part of this for many, many years. We're not going to see them go away. And people can't afford it anyway. Who can afford a $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 car, especially in this economy with inflation going the way it is and wages being in a tough situation that they are? So it's coming down to the focus. We have to focus a lot on energy. For us in Northern California, we have to get our water situation back in line so that we deliver farm water, we deliver urban water to people, and then environmental water, which is 50% of the water in the state. You'll see the LA Times and others say, oh, it's 80% goes to ag. No, it's only 40%. That number's down dramatically now. The environmental water supposedly to help the fish have 1 degree colder water in the fall, or keeping Klamath Lake extra full so the sucker fish might benefit. This is harming local economies and harming the food supply of the nation. And we're going to be in a real bad way in 2023 when we look at all the food that did not get planted in this country. And you look at the world market, for example, Ukraine is going to have an almost impossible time exporting the grain that they normally do. Hungary and India have cut off grain exports because they're worried about taking care of themselves. So the world market's going to look a heck of a lot different from the crops that didn't get planted. So ag, water, forestry, energy.
Thank you. Mr. Steiner.
Yeah, I just like to take a moment, right? This is one of the big problems that my opponent has in DC. It's picking a priority, right? And executing on that. It's how my opponent's gone to DC for 10 years and done 2 bills, right? Renaming a post office and giving 300 acres of land to an Indian tribe for a casino, right? Because he doesn't have a way to do this intellectual triage and say the most important issue is. Instead, he went from water to forestry, to water to energy, to Ukrainian grain. This is a problem. We need to demand more, intellectual robustness out of our politicians. And so I will just point out that I do have an answer to that. The most important thing that we need to focus on in the North State today is our forests. We need to go to DC and we need to work on restarting the lumber industry. We need to work on cutting harmful regulations that were made with the best of intentions in the 1970s and 1980s, things like NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, Protection Act. And we need to relook at that, right? Are they accomplishing the things they set out to do? Is designating wide swaths of northern forests appropriate? Putting them off limits for logging because of the northern spotted owl. Is that appropriate when we're losing massive quantities of woodland to giant fires? Obviously, the answer to that is no. We need to restart the timber industry. We need to swing the pendulum back, one from clear cutting to no cutting. We need sustainable forest management. And I'm going to go to DC and I'm going to execute on that one objective. And I talked a little about water. I've talked about it before. It's great if you can have a couple secondary objectives. But if you're asking me for the most important issue that I will work on, it is bringing timber industry back. It is thinning out our forests. It is generating jobs from forestry. And it is protecting homes from fire risk. All right, because those are the threats that are facing CD1 communities right now. And that is the biggest thing that we need to fix in Washington.
Thank you. Remember our civility rules, though. Okay, we just try to focus on the policy. I'm going to add a question here about Medicare and Social Security, both of which have been strained. What would you say would be the things that the Assembly could do to strengthen our Medicare and Social Security systems? And we'll begin with you, Mr. Steiner.
I think you mean the House of Reps, so not the Assembly, correct?
That's okay.
That's fine. The biggest thing we need to do to strengthen Medicare and Social Security is to ensure that they are adequately funded and not held hostage, by the GOP in the next election. The GOP has promised to say that they will hold Medicare and Social Security hostage, that they want those programs cut, that they want benefits reduced, and that they're willing to shut the federal government down, causing untold economic damage. They'll stop the government from being able to repay its debt. This is like trying to negotiate with someone who's holding a gun to their own head. This is what makes America work, right? Like, we need to have these programs because we voted on these programs. When Republicans claim that they're going to stand against raising the debt ceiling, they're not standing for cutting programs. They're just saying we refuse to pay the bill. They're like a person that goes into a nice restaurant, orders the most expensive thing on the menu, and then dashes out before they pay. And they want accolades for being fiscally conservative. I think it's crazy. All right. So in Congress, Social Security and Medicare are not my priority. Do I want to protect them? Absolutely. Will I do a better job protecting them than any Republican right now? Because yes, because Republican leadership has said that they're going to use them as bargaining chips to reduce federal spending. I think that's irresponsible. I think that's un-American. If Republicans want to reduce Social Security and Medicare spending, they're going to have to tell Americans why and how and give them a plan. And instead, we just get a ransom. My message to every voter that is concerned about their Medicare, that is concerned about Social Security, is that Democrats made those programs, Democrats care about those programs, and Democrats will defend those programs if we return to power in November.
Thank you. Mr. LaMalfa?
Well, it's interesting. As a member of Congress, you have to be able to do many things at one time. Walk and chew gum at the same time is a common held saying like that. So me and my staff are working on a myriad of issues in the district and in the DC office on many bills and taking on many policies because the people need it, and so we're working constantly on energy and many other things. So we're talking Medicare and Social Security. Yeah, these are Democrat created programs way back in the day. And anytime the Democrats seem to create something, as we're seeing with Obamacare, before too long, you're seeing big problems fiscally because they overpromise and under-engineer the program to actually work long-term and be funded and be in a way that's going to be sustainable. So Republicans fight to try and keep Social Security sustained and Medicare, but it's very difficult when you have disingenuous arguments about it. So one candidate somewhere, that a Republican might have said something about how to balance the budget. That doesn't represent the whole party, doesn't represent our leadership. So that's a misguided way of describing how we feel about it. So constantly we're having to clean up after Democrat overspending problems and things that overpromise. But we have ideas on Social Security that can help bridge the gap between now and then. And young people want choices out there. They want to be able to put more of their earnings in something that they're afraid, instead of something they're afraid is going to fail on them. And so we have a very narrow path to try and do both, but that's what we're seeking. And so for people out there worried, Republicans are going to cut our Social Security, that isn't it at all. This is something that starts with people 15, 20 years away from Social Security on how to engineer a way to have them still see their benefits and have other options along the way. So, but it comes down to Democrats overpromising on programs that are not sustainable as they are. People pay into Social Security, they should be able to get what they paid into it with the growth that happens back out of that program and not be somehow taxed or have it taken away from them, as the Democrats have instituted, taxing the Social Security benefits.
Thank you. You kind of alluded to the issue of Obamacare. What is your position on the way healthcare should be funded, Mr. LaMalfa?
Well, in the ideal, it's funded by people and families that can afford their own healthcare system, or whether it's part of their employment at a job that works with that as well. So in the ideal, that's what you would have. There's so much government interference on what kind of healthcare will be delivered and was required of an insurance plan. The insurance should be a choice of any age worker to pick the type of plan that works for them. Okay, a young man does not need a wide range of insured coverage in a plan. He wants a basic one. And so a young family wants something a little bit different. Somebody that's elderly might want something a little different than that. Obamacare never gave you those choices. It said you can pick the gold plan or the silver plan or the bronze plan, something designed by bureaucrats that have really no idea what families need. And so we're seeing that it's running up on the rocks. Since it started being implemented in 2013, it's going to run into a problem here in a few short months because there's not enough COVID money thrown around to pump it up. So government having a decreased role and giving people more opportunities to shop for insurance policies across state lines, have more chances to look for a plan that fits them instead of having a narrow government choice. Government is not good at providing good choices. And so when we have the situation we're seeing here, I hope it's an opportunity for reform and put Obamacare on the back burner and let people have more of their own definition of what an insurance plan is for them. We can get back to affordability by not having so darn much costs that are affecting hospitals and doctors with lawsuits and overpriced insurance they have just to keep their doors open. Energy costs affect them too. Everything that costs something to run a business negatively affects them as well. And this all comes from a lot of regulations affecting the price of everything. And so when it's harder to keep your employees in your office open as a doctor or hospital, it just adds to the whole swirl of mess the Democrats have led us.
Thank you. Mr. Steiner.
Yeah, so first I'll go back to Social Security. This comes from Kevin McCarthy. He's the leader of the House Minority Leader. He said that if Republicans win control of the House, the GOP will use raising the debt limit as leverage to force spending cuts, which will include cuts to Medicare and Social Security and limit additional funding to Ukraine. That's from the Washington Post, which I hope you do not think is fake news. And I hope that listeners to this will agree is a legitimate news source. So that's number one, why I said that. Number two, let's talk about healthcare, right? So my opponent says he doesn't like government healthcare, that it never works. I go to the VA. I go to the VA in Chico. I go to the VA in Reading. I go to the VA down in Mather. I earned that, but it's government healthcare. Will it be applied to everyone in the United States? No, but it does work. And it works so much better than private healthcare. So when my opponent says that government healthcare never works, he's saying that he's fine with throwing the VA away. He's saying that he's fine with throwing, Medicare away because he's an ideologue on this. All right. This isn't about capitalism. If we want to solve healthcare, we need to do a few things, and we can make these easy reforms. I'm not a fan of big Medicare for all plans. I think that's unrealistic. Let's do some incremental benefits, right? One is pricing transparency so that people know exactly what they're going to pay before they go into a hospital. It sounds crazy, but a lot of times people don't know what the final bill is going to be. You can't compare goods and services like that. You can't do capitalism if you don't know what the price is. It's like ordering something and then only after you've eaten it do you get the bill. And the second thing we need to do is we need to increase the throughput of doctors and nurses. And that means getting the government more involved in their training, not less. We have problems staffing rural healthcare because we're not training enough doctors, because we're making it so expensive for them to go to school that the private market in education has failed them. So yes, I think there's a lot of things we can do to help private healthcare systems as a government. And two, I think there are a lot of government healthcare systems, including the VA and Social Security, that work very well for their beneficiaries.
Thank you. All right. 2 minutes for a closing statement, and we'll begin with Mr. Steiner.
You're muted.
Oh, I'm muted. Sorry. Yeah, got it. It was going to happen once tonight. So, So first, I would like to thank everyone for logging in tonight. I hope you have a more robust understanding of my goals for forestry and water, for democracy and reproductive privacy. I just want to close with the North State can do better than the status quo, right? Our Congress would be stronger with more veterans and more moderates working together to, as the Declaration of Independence says, promote the general welfare. In a normal election, I would end an event like this by reviewing what I want to do and by respectfully disagreeing with my opponent. But this is not a normal election. And my opponent does not deserve respectful disagreement on the key issue of this race, integrity. I did not spend 2 years of my life fighting for democracy in Iraq, only to watch our democracy here destroyed from within. All democracies are fragile, and politicians like Doug LaMalfa, who embrace election conspiracy theories, are playing with a fire that they do not understand because they have never fought for something bigger than themselves. My opponent lied to us about everything from the results of the 2020 election to celebrating infrastructure projects that he himself voted against. His whole career involves taking credit for things he did not do while avoiding blame for the things he did. Democracy depends on two things: a mutual acknowledgement of fundamental facts and a mutual respect for the democratic process. We cannot survive politicians who are unwilling to admit the truth and unwilling to peacefully yield power after losing an election. To move forward, we need to agree on where we are. To move in the direction that voters want, we need to agree on election results. Far-right radicals like my opponent do not understand this, and they have hijacked the Republican Party of Reagan, of Eisenhower, and of Lincoln. It is time for the silent majority to stand up. It's time for the political center to reject partisanship. It's time for the North State to get a representative who will fight for everyone rather than
Mr. Steiner.
We need to fix our forests.
We
need to fix our water. The definition of insanity is voting for the same person and expecting
we're right at the edge of meeting our requirements for civility here.
I understand that, ma'am.
But I appreciate.
I love the North State. I want to make a positive difference. And whether you're a Democrat, an independent, or Republican listening
time
to
is
this,
up.
I'd be honored to earn your vote.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Mr. LaMalfa, be bold.
Okay, what do we see here? Someone that can't even follow the rules, can't tell the truth about even this forum here, in that the date that we were going to agree upon sat in his email for a week as we were trying to work together to come up with this date tonight. So instead, waiting and to run nasty campaign ads saying Doug LaMalfa doesn't want to have a debate. Well, look, here we are right now. So we work on a lot of things in our office there, and the VA came up as a topic, and that is one of the most frequent phone calls my great staff has to deal with veterans trying to get their benefits or get something clarified. I had to actually carry a letter and some documents myself to Washington, D.C. because they couldn't seem to make it there for a veteran that had waited 20, almost 30 years for satisfaction and help on his benefits. Finally, we got that for him, and he's so happy. So we do a lot of work on the ground to help people. The VA, if you want that as an example of healthcare, a lot of good work gets done at the VA. A lot of people tell us that good things, but there's a lot of folks that are extremely frustrated that they have to call our office to get their case moved. So that happens a lot with the other offices like Social Security where they can't get help. So yes, we walk and chew gum at the same time working on many, many issues and not single focus. We're also proud of some of the work we've done on healthcare with the teaching health centers, which helps to bring doctors and healthcare professionals into our rural district. So my opponent doesn't seem to want to talk about anything except negativity and can't even be civil long enough to do this. But what do you expect from somebody who moved up from LA about a year and a half ago at Pelosi's behest, I suppose, to run against me in this district? So fine, but if you can't stick to the truth, if you can't talk about the reasons why you really want to do something in Congress, other than making things up about what I've tried to do and what the people of this district actually know about what I do. They know, they understand. So I would appreciate their vote, and I thank for the time tonight.
Yes, well, I'm sorry we ended on this note, but I appreciate very much that you've taken the time to be part of this forum. And I think the voters have been given a good opportunity to understand the reasons that you are running and what you hope to achieve.
Thank you, Carol.
So we appreciate your participation, and we appreciate those who attended, because I think this brings us to the ballot box, knowing more and being better informed. So we hope everyone does vote. And if you want to know about the propositions, that information is also available at our website. And as I mentioned, Voters Edge also is a good source of information.
I'd like to ask one question, right? In the first deadline for the debate, I met and my opponent did not, right?
I'm sorry. Wait, bye.
Sorry, I don't mean to impose.
Oh, we did okay.